Working as an FBI special agent was my dream job. My whistleblowing was apolitical and in the spirit of upholding my oath. Nonetheless, the FBI cynically elected to close ranks and attack the messenger.
The FBI will crush you. This government will crush you and your family if you try to expose the truth about things that they are doing that are wrong. We are all examples of that.
Joining us now are Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle. Thanks for joining us, fellas.
FBI whistleblowers Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle both join us now. Gentlemen, so glad to have you on the program. Thank you for your testimony.
We need more folks like you, and I'm sure more people are going to be, from your background, are going to be giving you guys more intel as you're sharing that with the rest of us. We can kind of see that this is becoming normal for them to be held accountable, because I think especially an institution that we pay their salaries, they need to be held accountable.
I think a lot of people do share our beliefs and convictions. I think they just aren't at the point that Steve and I and others have gotten to. They're too afraid.
Thank you so much for being a guest here on PBD Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
How big is that bloody flag that Steve's got? It's the stone wall of his house. Lots of love, guys. Thanks very much for joining us.
Steve Friend, Garrett O'Boyle. Thank you for being with us this morning. More importantly, thank you for speaking out. We appreciate it.
You're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding suspendables Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast on a Thursday, 10:30 Eastern Time, coming to you live on rumble.com/amradpod, guys. Make sure you give us a thumbs up, follow the channel, subscribe if your heart compels you to do that, and definitely pick up on the audio format of the podcast. We're on iTunes and Spotify and iHeart. If you subscribe there, you'll get the episodes when we drop them, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Man, it's like Thursday, but this week is dragging along. I think that always happens when you're coming off of a holiday weekend. You just have no perspective on what day it is. And then at the same time, the year is flying by. We're almost into June. So excited to get to everything we have today because we just got a lot to catch up on. We're going to be drilling down on education today. The show is called Educated Citizenry, sort of a spin-off of a famous Thomas Jefferson quote, which pulled off of the Jefferson Monticello website, which is, quote, "An educated citizenry is a vital requisite for our survival as a free people." And communists take that to mean that everyone is entitled to a free government education. That's not what it means, but it is really important that we make sure that people are smart enough to make good decisions for themselves. And we're seeing some bad decisions and bad outcomes happening that are going to ensure the exact opposite. So we're going to talk today about the Department of Education and the efforts to perhaps shut it down, and then other efforts to keep it going, and what is actually it is that the DOE does. We have the effort potentially from the president to defund Harvard. Excellent from my perspective. Supreme Court is against Catholic charter schools because separation of church and state. I think Thomas Jefferson wrote that down somewhere in the Constitution. No, he wrote it in a private letter. But again, if you're not educated, you wouldn't know that. And then we want to do a deep dive into artificial intelligence and how people are rampantly using it to cheat in college and the outgrowths that we can have for all of that. So we're going to get to that and a bunch more. It's going to be a jam-packed American Radicals Podcast episode. So let's bring on Garrett at GOB Actual is where you find him on the social media. How you doing, my friend? You still shadow banned?
Well, Steve, as probably only you noticed, my internet lost connection right when we started. So
look for all the white vans outside. They got me last time. I got there in time to say goodbye to everyone. I'm glad we got that one out of the way. But in the event that we do lose you again, I got a lot of stuff. Don't worry about it. I can monologue on through if necessary. But I'm glad to have you along because I've got some good stuff that I want to get to and talk to you because you bring a unique perspective because you guys do the homeschooling. We do the Christian schooling. So we're definitely ejected, both of us, from the Satan's Youth Ministries. We're hoping that maybe more people will embrace that. And I think the best way we can start that is with dismantling the Department of Education.
It'd be a good first step.
A judge is saying that we can't do that.
Oh, another judge getting in the way of what the people want, huh, Steve?
Maybe they were educated in one of Satan's Youth Ministries. This is reporting from PBS. A judge blocks Trump's executive order to dismantle the education department. Little details on it. The injunction was requested in a lawsuit filed by Somerville and East Hampton school districts in Massachusetts and the American Federation of Teachers, because the teachers unions are very concerned about the Department of Education because it was essentially created as a payoff to them. And it's insane to me that two school districts in Massachusetts can end in a universal injunction for the entire country, because that's not really a thing. But apparently, the judges that ruled on this injunction didn't go to law school, or at least when they did, they didn't get educated properly. So in the lawsuit, the group said that layoffs, because we're very concerned about government workers, they amounted to an illegal shutdown of the Department of Education. They said it left the department unable to carry out responsibilities that were required by Congress, including duties to support special education, distribute financial aid, and enforce civil rights laws, because the Department of Education is basically the Department of Justice from the perspective of the teachers. In his order, the U.S. District Judge, whose name is Myung-Joon, very American sounding,
Yeah, can we
said the
make sure
layoffs.
that this judge is first not part of the People's Republic of China apparatchik?
The comment from this guy who's highly educated, I presume he went to undergraduate and then got a law degree. So he actually is a doctor, a juris doctorate. If you want to actually refer to him as doctor, you would be actually appropriate. Judge Myung-joon said that the layoffs of federal employees at the Department of Education, quote, will likely cripple the department.
Well,
So
yes,
breaking
judge,
news, water is wet. When you defund an agency, it cripples the agency.
which is the goal, and it's what we voted for. So help me out here. But I've got three things on this, I think, maybe four. One, I'm not a big fan of all these executive orders. They have been getting more and more out of control for at least as long as I've been voting, like Bush 2. And then that spirals into Patriot Act and how government really has been going off the rails in hyperdrive for you Star Wars fans out there. And the hyperdrive works. Chewie has punched it a long time ago, and we're just sailing into this executive order territory. Not a big fan of that. Haven't been for a long time. At the same time, what's a president supposed to do? He ran on a mandate. How long have we been talking about Trump's mandate and the people voted for a mandate? And so he's trying to do what the people elected him to do. That being said, people with an R behind their name also got elected or reelected as part of Donald Trump's mandate. And then those people stand in the way of Donald Trump's mandate. So he goes to the executive order because Congress, this judge wants to invoke Congress. Congress isn't doing what they were elected to do, or at least the majority. Yes, there's still Democrats there, but as we all know, Republicans have the majority. And it's Republicans who are beginning to stand in the way or just send out tweets, and they're not actually doing their job of legislating like they're supposed to do, because a government that was cohesive, that had the power that we gave them through election, they would be working to accomplish Donald Trump's mandate. And then you have the Department of Education. Maybe this judge is right and that Congress did ratify some law or laws, probably multiple laws along the way, to give some type of authority to the Department of Education. Well, then Congress needs to again step in and rectify those laws, disregard them, remove them from the rolls, and say these laws are irrelevant now because the people, by and large, voted for a change. And that change, one of the big things is starting with dismantling Department of Education.
Well, what is it that the Department of Education actually does? Let's just do like a brief history lesson on it, because people, I think, today think because they were educated in Satan's youth ministries that we're at the end of history. They're kind of like not briefed up on, and they figure that, well, clearly when George Washington wrote the Constitution, he put the Department of Education in there, right? No.
No.
So
Yeah.
let's actually find out what U.S. News World Report says. What happens if the education department is dissolved? It was created in 1979, 6 years before I was born. All right. Jimmy Carter who was a great president, I'm sure, from the perspective of U.S. News and the teachers' unions, who we'll get to in a minute. The Education Department disperses funds to elementary and secondary schools. So we basically take American tax dollars, or we borrow on the backs of their children so that we can give the money back out to who we want. That sounds a lot like communism. And they have a focus on low-income student enrollments. They also collect data on schools so they can find out how bad the schools are doing. And they oversee recognition of accrediting agencies and programs. As long as they meet with the standards of the Department of Education, you can attend that school. And they are also very very involved in managing student financial aid, so the loan programs, because we're in like $2 billion of loans right now. The department does not set curriculum. So for all the wailing and gnashing of teeth about if we got rid of the Department of Education, we wouldn't know how to do reading, writing, and arithmetic, they don't actually set it. They don't even manage what is taught in the classroom. They don't set or enforce state academic standards. They don't establish schools or colleges. They don't set graduation requirements. So it's kind of a entity that exists just to exist. The Education Department awarded $120 billion in federal loans. So they're getting people into debt so that they always have to pay back, which is unbankruptable debt to the government. And I do think it's worth noting that their fiscal year 2024 budget was $268 billion.
That's a lot of
Without
cheddar.
educating a single child, which all the talk about how we lose the Department of Education, like the kids aren't going to learn anything, which is what you'll hear from who the real beneficiaries are of the Department of Education, and that's the teachers union. So I went, so you didn't have to the NEA today, and they're going to cry about what's really wrong about getting rid of the Department of Education. How dismantling Department of Education would harm students who aren't educated by the Department of Education, by the way. 90%, this is really disturbing, Garrett. 9 out of 10 kids and 95% of kids with disabilities attend public school.
Whew.
Now, because they are a teachers union who are likely uneducated themselves and can't actually hold multiple thoughts in their heads at a time, they try to make a point about some of these things and the problems with getting rid of the DOE, but they just kind of blow up in on themselves. So roughly 7 million kids, or 15% of students, receive special education that provides $15 billion to support students with disabilities. So basically, the Department of Education gives $2,000 for every kid that has special education. This program could be transferred to another agent, and according to the teachers unions, that duty, it would be significantly less likely that students with disabilities receive the services because reasons ungiven. No further information. Another bureaucracy would be handing out the $2,000, and because it probably isn't in the hands of the Department of Education, which really just exists to give money to the teachers unions, they're saying that's a problem. Secondly, many expect the White House to move the Education Department's Office for Civil Rights to the DOJ. That move would, according to the teachers unions, severely weaken its ability to protect students against discrimination based on race, gender, and disability, because according to teachers unions, I think they believe that the Department of Education has some sort of legal enforcement mechanisms that could put people in jail. Again, they probably were educated in America's youth ministries.
Yeah, last I checked, the DOE did not have any 1811s assigned to it to
Don't
investigate.
give them ideas.
Yeah, they're going to take it. They're going to run with it. On one hand, I look at this as an appeal to authority. We need the government employees. We need the teachers, the ones with the special training and education to train our disabled youth. Do we, though? Because who's the expert here? Somebody who went to college and got a degree and ends up getting pissed off at kids with disabilities or kids in general because they realize that the government school system is beyond broken. But no, let's just cater to them because they're the authoritative experts on the matter. Or is it the parents who are truly the expert because they've had their child since birth and have grown and learned and discovered disabilities and different mechanisms that may or may not work? And then you're going to cart them off to the government for a minimum of 8 hours a day and let them take the reins there. I just have never in this specific piece where it comes to disabled students, I don't know how you can make a logical argument for the government being the ones who are better off providing care, providing education than the parent. I don't think that's ever going to make sense to me.
And again, the authorities being the teachers unions were the ones that were saying that we needed to keep the kids home for years on end because there was a
Great point.
cold out
Mhm.
there. So clearly their priorities are not the kids. It was just, hey, how can we get our paychecks without actually having to do anything? Or at most we can just hop on Zoom because kids are resilient. Thank you very much, Randy Weingarten. I want to sort of keep this focus on education, which we're really going to do most of today's show. We'll go to the Supreme Court because it's reliably conservative now, right? But before we do, let's thank the show sponsor, which is the M-Clip Company. M-clip.com is where you go. M-clip.com. These are these cool money clips. They've been sponsoring us for now over a year. This is over 20 years in existence. American-owned family business. They are sleek looking, guys. They last forever. If you gunk it up, you mess it up, you set it back, they'll fix it. No questions asked. Get your initials monogrammed on them. You can get a baseball team. You can get the Suspendables logo and emblem if you want to rock that and say you are a person who does the right thing at the right time in the right way for the right reasons. And all of it's available 10% off with the promo code Suspendable. We are in graduation season. It's a really good gift. So if somebody you know matriculated through the education system and they are not a dyed-in-the-wool communist and they can do reading, writing, and arithmetic somehow, make sure you reward them. So go to m-clip.com. Promo code is Suspendable. And let's talk about Supreme Court because they weighed in on the separation of church and state, which is not a thing, very much like universal injunctions. And I just have the court opinion up here, so it's a little bit hard to read, but it comes from the Supreme Court of the United States. Just some background on it. They effectively stopped the opening of the nation's first religious charter school in Oklahoma. They were deadlocked 4-4 because Amy Coney Barrett recused herself because she's Catholic and it was a Catholic school. So, courage of convictions there from Amy Barrett. We're not going to allow the patriarchy to lose on that one. Several courts and even the Republican Attorney General in Oklahoma, they ruled against or opposed a publicly funded Catholic school from the start, claiming that it violated separation of church and state. Now, the most surprising thing here is Brett Kavanaugh. Brett Kavanaugh said, quote, when you have a program that's open to all comers except religion, that seems like rank discrimination against religion.
There you go. Which would be what, Steve? A violation of the First Amendment. So this separation of church and state, I bought the lie, like everybody, or just about everybody, for a long, long time until I started. It actually started with Jeff Durbin from Apologia Church, which we used as one of our end biblical worldviews. I don't know, maybe a month ago, something like that. But I started looking into it a little bit more when I first heard of him years ago, and I want to pop this up here because I think it's important to go back to some of the roots of where this error started. And it started in this 1947 decision. Justice Hugo Black wrote for the majority in this case. It was Emerson versus the Board of Education. And I'm going to just read some of what he put in there. The Establishment of Religion Clause of the First Amendment means at least this: neither a state nor the federal government can set up a church. Neither can pass laws which aid one religion, aid all religions, or prefer one religion over another. I think that checks so far. I'm confident with that. Neither can force nor influence a person to go to or to remain away from church against his will, or force him to profess a belief or disbelief in any religion. Again, we're checking here so far with the First Amendment. No person can be punished for entertaining or professing religious beliefs or disbeliefs, for church attendance or non-attendance. He goes on a little later. Neither a state nor the federal government can, openly or secretly, participate in the affairs of any religious organizations or groups, and vice versa. In the words of Jefferson, the clause against establishment of religion by law was intended to erect a wall of separation between church and state. And that wall of separation it comes from that letter you mentioned. But this piece here, which is from ChristianHeritageFellowship.com, it says, Since this ruling in 1947, courts throughout America have looked to this opinion as a watershed from its historical interpretation from the days of America's founding fathers. And that's the critical piece, is that Hugo Black and the people on the court at the time who voted in the majority with him deviated from what our founding fathers intended and from what they wanted, even from what Jefferson wrote in this letter. It goes on here, Justice Black and those supporting his opinion on the court introduced a completely new element that was and is at variance with the historical interpretation of the First Amendment. Justice Black and his colleagues inserted new law into the Constitution that the Supreme Court justices for nearly 160 years had never seen. The historic position of the Supreme Court and lower courts was summarized by Supreme Court Associate Justice David Brewer in his majority opinion in Holy Trinity versus United States, 1892, and subsequently enlarged upon in his book, The United States, A Christian Nation. And it really just goes to show, again, and I think this ties in to the overall education piece that we're focusing on today, because almost everyone for the last couple hundred years have been, quote unquote, educated to believe this myth, this lie that the Supreme Court in 1947 inserted into the Constitution.
I do think it's interesting that Hugo Black supported internment of Japanese, and as a senator voted against an anti-lynching bill. So as long as we're going to do the thing where because George Washington or Thomas Jefferson owned slaves, they have to disregard everything that they did. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. And in this one for the charter schools entirely, like, it is patently discriminatory against religious groups, because you can set up a charter school and say, look, I just want to have this private organization. And I'm going to teach the kids this curriculum, which the Department of Education has no say over, and get the funding to do it. But they're specifically saying, but because you attend the mass, you can't do that, which is very discriminatory. And you would think that Amy Barrett would recognize that, because it was, in fact, her tribe, but she interpreted that as a way to just shirk her responsibilities, to be a steward for your good, to be a deacon for your good. Instead, she said, it's just easier for me to sit back
Yes.
and just not take a stand.
Let
not
me
be
remove
courageous.
myself.
It's not like she has a lifetime appointment where she's at risk of losing that seat. So
It's a broader issue of cowardice too. Someone in her position, you're going to invoke that level of cowardice where you're just going to remove yourself. Americans used to have courage of conviction on all sorts of matters. Their religion, which from our founding was rooted in biblical tradition, but now we're at this level where even a Supreme Court justice is just going to fade away into her own weakness, into her own cowardice, and say, actually, I'm not really here to be a servant for your good. I kind of like the gig I have, so I'm just going to remove myself from it.
I don't really, not going to hold my breath waiting on her to hold the line when the inevitable universal injunction comes, when the President Trump stops funding Harvard. They're going to require him to continue to fund those communists instead of funding the trade schools, which is another story. So this comes from Truth Social, from the president. Quote, I am considering taking $3 billion of grant money away from a very anti-Semitic Harvard and giving it to trade schools all across our land. What a great investment that would be for the USA, and so badly needed.
Has he been talking to Mike Rowe?
Mike Rowe is the man. I'm telling you, that guy gets it. And it's so funny because he is a classically trained opera singer who's cultivated the personality. And I don't think he's fake at all. I think he really does wholly respect the trades, but his background is not in that whatsoever. But he comes to it with humility, and he brings the facts here. And like, that is the reason you're supposed to actually have school, right? Why do you go to school? So you can learn things and get a job, not so that you can be indoctrinated into thinking that, I don't know, the Department of Education was started right around when the Magna Carta was written. Now, you would not learn those things in college nowadays. Now, I want to get to this long piece that I found, Garrett, and I told you about it yesterday. It is illuminating about where we are and where we are now and where we're possibly going to be headed in the future, particularly around the courts. Let me see if we can't connect some dots here, which I was able to do when I studied it. It comes from New York Magazine. Everyone is cheating their way through college. ChatGPT has unraveled the entire academic project. Now, Gary, you and I are similar age demographic. Before we get to it, I mean, what was the best cheating scheme that either you or one of your buddies ever were able to perpetrate?
All right, like during a test or just for homework?
You choose, my man.
I mean, let me think here. The best. I want to. There's got to be something that really stands out.
I had respect for the people that walked in with the Starbucks cup with the cardboard sleeve that was over the cup where they had written all the answers on the test. And I mean, look, there is
Solid.
an educational value here. You're using some creative abilities instead of the chat GPT. While you ponder that, let's get to this story here, okay? And it starts, there's a personal account here that they like to kick it off with. And our guy's name here is Chungwin Lee, but he goes by Roy. So Roy Lee, he stepped onto Columbia University's campus this past fall, and by his own admission, proceeded to use artificial intelligence to cheat on nearly every assignment. He started at Columbia, an Ivy League school, as a sophomore this past September. He didn't worry about academics or his GPA. Quote from Roy, "Most assignments in college are not relevant. They're hackable by AI. And I just had no interest in doing them," unquote.
Well,
When
wait though. Are they consider it cheating if you go to ChatGPT and say, "Hey, I'm writing a paper on World War II. Can you give me some background?" Like, is that, or is that just
it will
research?
get to that because this
Okay.
is a battle the schools are trying to fight and losing entirely. So when Roy was asked why he had gone through so much trouble to get into an Ivy League university only to offload all of the learning, because theoretically you're there to learn, right? You're not clearly not there to just buy a diploma. Uh, he said, quote, "Columbia, it's the best place to meet your co-founder and your wife," unquote. So he had an idea. He hasn't found the wife yet, but he did find a partner for his startup company. He's a coder. He spent some 600 hours using this program called Leet Code, which is a training platform that prepares coders to answer riddles that tech companies ask them when they are doing an interview, which, I mean, I'm out of my depth on this. Apparently this is what goes on. And Roy Lee figured, what if he built a program that hid AI from the browsers during these remote job interviews so the interviewers could cheat on their interviews and be successful? He and his co-founder launched a tool that did just that. Guy identified a problem in the market, a gap, invented the solution. Roy Lee was called into the academic integrity office at Columbia University, and the school put him on disciplinary probation after a committee found him guilty of, quote, advertising a link to a cheating tool and providing students with the knowledge to access the tool and use it how they saw fit. So that's the buildup for the problem. And there are multiple examples because now in 2025, the artificial intelligence is not only at the fingertips of the college kids, it's been at their fingertips as they've matriculated, and it just keeps getting better and better. Um, I think that we're going to start seeing this now move on into the workforce, right? Because
Oh,
these
no
kids
doubt.
have used it entirely to work their way through, and they've done the moral relativism in order to justify what they've done because they don't see a problem with it. So, the background on ChatGPT. January 2023, 2 months after OpenAI launched ChatGPT. So, I mean, we're like 2.5 years. It's not that long in existence.
No.
There was a survey done of 1,000 college students, and they found that 90% of them had used ChatGPT, like
90.
immediately started using. And ChatGPT wasn't very strong at that point.
So by next year, it's going to be 100. I mean,
Oh,
dude, that's crazy. I mean, it really shows. In one way, I'm trying to think about this long term and where it's headed. Obviously, it's headed towards more AI, but I have a hard time not believing that at some point we're going to have Google Glass or some sort of eye chip implanted, and we're going to be able to do all this stuff with another piece of tech that's in our brain and just see it all in one of our eyes or something like that.
all will
Because it's
have the
just,
mark, and
yep,
you will need it to engage in commerce.
yep. If you don't, good
Jesus
luck.
juked
No.
him.
Yes, he
All
did.
right. All right. So back to this piece from New York Magazine. And here's some examples of other students that they had to use pseudonyms because they don't want to be exposed, even though everyone knows that everyone's doing it apparently on college campuses. Sarah is a freshman and she's at Wilfrid Laurier University, not an Ivy League, just regular college in Ontario, in Canada. She first used ChatGPT to cheat during her spring semester of her final year in high school. Quote, I spend so much time on TikTok, hours and hours until my eyes start hurting, which makes it hard to plan and do my schoolwork. With ChatGPT, I can write an essay in 2 hours that normally takes 12. So she's doing it to be efficient and spend more time on Chinese spyware. The future, America. This is our future. Another individual, her name is Wendy, or at least that's her pseudonym. She's a freshman finance major, so not a lot of paper writing going on. She's against using artificial intelligence. She's got integrity. This is who you want in Wall Street, right? None of these nefarious individuals. We don't need any more Bernie Madoffs. We need Wendy. She's against using AI. Or, as she later clarified, quote, I'm against copy and pasting. I'm against cheating and plagiarism, all of that. It's against the student handbook. But
Sure.
Wendy uses AI to write an essay, which is whenever she writes an essay, she follows 3 steps. Step 1, I say, quote, I'm a first year, this is her talking to the artificial intelligence. I say, I'm a first year college student. I'm taking an English class. Otherwise, Wendy will say, it will give you a very advanced, complicated writing style. And she wants to dumb it down so everybody knows she's a freshman. She doesn't want to get caught. Step 2, she provides some background on the class she's taking before copying and pasting her professor's instructions into the chatbot. Step 3, Wendy says, I ask, according to the prompt, can you please provide me an outline or organization to give me a structure so I can follow and write my essay? It then gives me an outline, introduction, topic sentences, paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3. Sometimes Wendy asks for a bullet list, but she says, I have difficulty with the organization and it makes it really easy for me to follow. So she doesn't copy and paste, except every time that she just copies and pastes off of artificial intelligence. Here's the kicker here. All right. The author of this piece asked Wendy if she could read the paper that Wendy turned in. Her opening line was, to what extent is schooling hindering students' cognitive ability to think critically?
Well, you're not thinking critically because you're using ChatGPT to come up with your answer.
I don't think she read or proofread the essay that the artificial intelligence wrote for her. Now,
I
so
want to
here's
ask.
go
I
ahead.
want to ask Wendy, or let's see. She's a first year college. How many years or semesters is it going to take for Wendy to morph her morality just a little bit more? Because she's saying, I don't cut and paste from it. I just get an outline. I get some bullet points, whatever. How long is it going to take for her to say, now generate me a 3,000 word essay on all the information that you've thus sent? And then, because she doesn't want to cut and paste it, she's just going to say, now rephrase that entire essay. And then she's just going to cut and paste that one.
She's asking how college is hindering her ability to think critically as she's in college and unwilling to think critically. She just assigns it and delegates it to a machine to do. She's paying thousands of dollars for that and probably getting loans from the Department of Education. All right. Let's talk about the response, though, because how did professors contend with this? I mean, you and I were in school before cell phones were widely available, right? I mean, I know now kids in elementary, middle school have the ability to access a cell phone. And so that's got to be a challenge when it comes to taking an exam or something to that effect. I'm sure they have to seize the phones. How are they going to deal with ChatGPT? Back to this piece. These days, professors state their policy on their syllabus. They either allow AI, for example, as long as students can cite it like it's any other source, which is a little dubious. If you say, yeah, I went to Wikipedia and then asked ChatGPT to do it for me.
Because then do you have to cite all the sources that ChatGPT is citing?
I don't know.
I mean,
Yeah, I mean, well, it does it all for you. I mean, what
and
if
then
you just put in, what if you just put in the citations, I didn't do anything? At least you're honest.
or you could just say, ChatGPT, based off of all of the information you've generated thus far, can you create a bibliography in whatever format the professor requires? And then there you have that too now.
So some of the professors, they use a Trojan horse and they stick strange phrases in small white text in between the instructions for the assignment, hoping the kid doesn't see it, and then just copies and pastes it and puts it into the chat GPT. So it would kind of like mess it up. But what winds up happening is like it looks like somebody who has like English as a second language, and they can't definitively prove that they used artificial intelligence. All right. Teachers have tried AI proofing assignments and they return to the blue book. You remember the blue book?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, that's the handwritten assignment. You're going to walk in here and you're going to write it. I mean, when was the last time that you put a pencil to paper, Garrett? You're going to
Right.
get cramps about
Uh-huh.
paragraph 2, right? Massive numbers of students are going to emerge from university with degrees into the workforce, and they're essentially illiterate. This is a quote from this
Of course.
state piece. All right. And now we'll close it up with Roy Lee back on what his status is, because he's an entrepreneurial cat. I think that he's probably
He's going
the
places.
he's the sort that didn't need to go to college.
No,
Right.
no.
He just went there to really meet a co-founder for a tech firm. So this is what this guy is doing right now. And mad props to Roy. In late March, Columbia suspended him because he posted the details about his disciplinary hearing on X.
What?
He has no plans to go back to school, has no desire to work for a big tech company. He wants to do his own startup. So a month later, he launched Cluely, which scans a user's computer screen, listens to its audio in order to provide artificial intelligence, feedback, and answers to questions in real time without prompting, which Roy says is, quote, "We built Cluely so you never have to think alone again."
Hey, Cluely, how do we get more listeners to the AMRAD pod?
Well said, sir. I
Uh,
mean,
I think I know the answer to your question about when was the last time I had to write by hand. I think it was at phase 2 for the FBI's hiring process.
and it was still a handwritten exam.
Uh-huh.
I did it too.
Because I was I got the hand when you said hand cramp. It like sparked into my brain. I was like, oh, it was at phase 2 because they had to. You basically were writing a police report off of information they gave you, and even as I was a police officer at the time, I wasn't writing my reports. I was typing them at most, but usually we had a dictaphone and we dictate our report, and then somebody upstairs would type it up and then send it back to us, or you would do maybe a handwritten like addendum or follow-on report if there was more information that you needed to add or clarify something. But even that, you weren't handwriting those. We weren't handwriting tickets even, except for parking tickets. Everything was typed. But I remember in New York City at phase 2, writing this police report, I'm like, oh, my hand was cramping up. And I got it in right before the end of the hour or however long you had. And a lot of that was because of the handwriting. And I was like, I hope they can read this because it's not very legible.
I feel bad that you had to do phase 2 of New York City. I got to go to Fort Lauderdale because the land of milk and
Nice.
honey, my friend. I want to connect this, though, back to the courts, right? Because we have the courage of convictions, but people like Amy Barrett, they're going to hold the line. And then we have, as we've seen, lots of examples of these activist judges who are legislating from the bench. They're putting universal injunctions down to stop lawful executive orders from happening, when in fact the person who comes before the judge is saying this executive order or whatever rule is affecting me. I have standing here, and the judge should rule on that individual. And they shouldn't just say, well, it's a school district in Northeast Massachusetts, so for the rest of the country, this is going to apply too. That's not a thing. But maybe they use too much artificial intelligence during law school. And it occurred to me then last night, because I saw a ruling that's striking down an executive order, and I don't even know which one it is because there's just so many of them. And I found the ruling, and I thought either that's somebody who's retarded, or it could be artificial intelligence, or both. And it led me to the question of how much is artificial intelligence going to be used in drafting court briefings, court rulings from judges, to the point where artificial intelligence will essentially have taken over our
Yeah,
judicial
it's
system.
gonna take over.
And it's hard to read. I'm not going to read the entire thing, but there are a couple things that were circled because in a U.S. district court in the District of Columbia, the opinion that came down from the judge says the cornerstone of the American system of justice is independent judiciary and an independent bar willing to tackle unpopular cases, however daunting. The founding fathers knew this. And I said that because there's an exclamation point. from a judge in sentence 2 of a memorandum. And it also finishes up with the sentence, indeed, to rule otherwise would be unfaithful to the judgment and vision of the founding fathers!
With another
Exclamation point.
I wonder if we can take this, if it's in PDF format, and inject it into ChatGPT and say, "Hey, what are the chances this was written with AI?"
Grok will say, I recognize that. I wrote it yesterday.
I think you're right, Steve. I think this is taking over. It's going to first, as we're seeing with just already 90% of college students who are using it to cheat. Who's you have some level of accountability, like this main player here who's not going back to college now. I forget his name already, but he is
Roy.
Roy said, yeah, I was just trying new things and now I'm off on my own. So when you had a little bit of potential responsibility or accountability, like getting suspended from your university, who's going to do that at the FBI? Who's going to do that in the AUSA's office or in the judge's chambers? Nobody. Nobody's going to hold people accountable. So it's just the logical next step for a nation that's a late stage republic and in massive moral decline to just be like, "Oh, this is the easiest route to take, and I can spend more time on TikTok now."
And the credentialism with so many of these judges, they'll say, oh, they went to Harvard Law or Yale Law or Columbia Law. Well, we just read this piece that says like the rampant abuse of artificial intelligence started in the Ivy Leagues. So if anything,
Yeah.
they're going to be worse perpetrators of it.
Wasn't
And
that president of Harvard? Didn't she get in all sorts of trouble for plagiarism?
oh, President Gay?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, she
So,
did.
I mean, the president's doing it, I got an interesting cheating story for you. Yeah, I think we're gonna like this one here. So, when I was at Marquette, I was or when I was finishing up, I was a cop already. I was working midnights, and they were essentially right around when I came off probation at the PD. I got a letter from Marquette because I had been out of school for about a year and a half because after my junior year of college, I got hired by the police department, and then that college ended like what, early mid May, and the police academy started the day after Memorial Day. And I was like, well, the whole point of going to college was to get a job and become a police officer. So I'm going to take the job and I'll figure out college somewhere in the future, or maybe never. I don't know. I didn't at the time. But I get this letter in the mail from Marquette, and they essentially said, if you don't come back to finish your program, we're revamping things and you're gonna have to take all sorts of credits all over again. And I'm like, oh man, if I don't go back now, I'm probably never gonna go back. And so I did. I started going back, and mostly night school, and I was going a few days a week. And it was kind of like the crossover where you were doing a lot of it at home and online or whatever, and then you're just meeting once a week for a few hours. At the end of my junior year, my academic advisor, who really good guy, I had a really good relationship with him, and he sends me an email and he's like, "Hey, you're gonna have to come in for a meeting because one of my professors accused me of cheating." And I was like, "What? Like I didn't cheat on anything. Like what are you talking about?" And so I kind of go in blind to this meeting, and part of the homework for these courses were like these modules, and they only had 3 modules. And so by the time I took like 3 or 4 or 5 more classes, I had done all the modules. So, and I saved all my work on my computer, so when I would get another module that I'd already done, I'd go back and I'd reference what I wrote previously, and I would alter it, but the core of it would be the same. And so I would resubmit these, and no professor had a problem with that except for one. And so she accused me of cheating, and she claims, I guess, she somehow had access to other courses I had done. So she went back and read all the modules that she had assigned to us, and then the ones that were the same in other classes that I'd already done, and said like, oh, 60% or whatever it was of what I submitted, I had already submitted. And she tried to claim that that was plagiarism, and she called it self plagiarism. And I was like, I'm pretty sure that's not a
Not
thing.
a thing.
Not a
You
thing
can
at all.
cite yourself all
You're
the
right.
time.
Right. And so I'm in this meeting, and I went and I played nice because I'm like, whatever. And I'm thinking in my head, like, I don't even know if I'm coming back to school. This is the end of my junior year. I got hired by like, whatever. But I do the meeting, and the decision was to drop my grade for that class, an entire letter grade. And so I got a B instead of an A. And I was like, okay, whatever. But then, like a week later, I get like my final like feedback from her for like our final project or whatever. And I'm reading through it, and she's saying things that didn't apply to what I wrote. And she starts calling me a different student's name. So I mark this thing up. I like highlight pieces, and I sent it to my academic advisor. And I was like, she accused me of self plagiarism. I'm pretty sure that that's what she did here. And, fast forward 18 months when I go back to school, I meet with my academic advisor, and he's because initially he was like, do you want me to like run this up to the dean? Like, do you want to make a complaint? And I was like, absolutely, I want to make a complaint. She's accusing me of self plagiarism.
Total suspendable.
And it, yeah, and it appears that that's what she's doing here. And so when I go back, he was telling me like it caused like a shitstorm for her, but she was able to retain her job. I don't know what the outcome was for her, but it's like, maybe that's just another example, Steve, of like you said, a total suspendable whistleblowing, even just at Marquette University.
It was definitely a suspendable outcome too, where the person who did it probably got promoted.
Yeah, no doubt.
Hey, just remember, man, you got to be D for diploma. What do you call the guy who graduates last in his medical school? Doctor.
A doctor. Yeah. I still graduated cum laude, so she can, what we're getting close to our biblical worldview. I won't say any disparaging remarks.
I want to tie a loop also on the Oklahoma thing, the Catholic charter school, which is now not going to be a thing. Thank you very much, Amy Barrett, for having no courage of your conviction, and go back to Oklahoma and on the subject of education, because the governor there said separation of church and state. They have a superintendent of schools there who's probably going to run for governor, and I'm here for it, Ryan Walters. And this is a piece from NPR, which is decrying the curriculum, which again, the Department of Education does not set. It's up to the states. Oklahoma set some curriculum. Their education standards say that students must identify 2020 election discrepancies in air quotes, because it's NPR, of course. They said it was the safest and most secure election in the history of the country, where we all went to bed and one guy was winning and we all woke up and a pipe burst somewhere and the other guy won. So from NPR, new academic standards in Oklahoma call for the teaching of discrepancies in the 2020 election results, continuing to spread a false narrative years after it was first pushed by President Trump and his allies. Just the facts here, no editorializing. From NPR, which we fund, which the Republicans refuse to defund. Thank you. It says students must identify discrepancies in 2020 election results by looking at graphs and other information, including sudden halting of ballot counting in select cities and in key battleground states, the security risks of mail-in balloting, sudden batch dumps, an unforeseen record number of voters, and the unprecedented contradiction of bellwether county trends. So, in essence, use critical thinking skills to see if maybe the trends here looked like something was afoot. One of these things is not like the other. We had 2012 and 2016 and 2020 and 2024, and one of these was definitely way different. Can you use your cognitive abilities, or are you going to have to plug it into ChatGPT to tell you what it is that ChatGPT was probably programmed to tell you, which is safest, most secure election? You should read more NPR.
Yes, trust your government, trust all of the entities that exist, because they are making you. They're telling you to. They're not being a servant for your good. They're being a tyrant for your ill. But hey, just trust us, bro. It was safe. It was secure. Don't critically. It is worth, or I at least wonder, run that through Grok and run it through ChatGPT and maybe a couple others and see what they say, especially if you're precise with your data sets that you're inserting into it. But I do think you're probably right, at least with ChatGPT, there's probably some backdoor element there where anything regarding the 2020 election is safe and secure. But then again, we've got students like Wendy who, even when are charged with writing a paper about critically thinking, they can't. So I don't know. I'm not holding my breath even on Oklahoma.
And Ryan Walters has gone to the mats on so much stuff in education in Oklahoma. I think he's really aggressive and energetic. That's sort of what he was elected to do. He was a mandate sent, and he's been pursuing it since he's been in that position. I do think the NPR piece here kind of highlights something else, which I've always talked about. Communists in this country, they identify the choke points of society. Like we're more than them just by sheer numbers, but they realize that they can be the person at the door that allows you in or out of an event, and they can control the 50 people that are in that room. They'll go to the school boards. They don't have kids. They chopped off their genitals, but they'll still be at the school boards screaming and hollering about how we have to read books about when Sally became Harry, right?
Mhm.
And the communists will put themselves in positions. So even though you got a Ryan Walters there who's controlling the curriculum, NPR highlights the hero of the story, as they love to do, to make it more relatable. This guy named Aaron Baker, Oklahoma City high school government teacher. Because the standard is for U.S. history, he's a government teacher. This is a history curriculum. He's not going to actually wind up teaching it, but he decided to weigh in nonetheless on his opinion. And this is a quote from Aaron Baker. I would have no qualms at all about telling my students. In fact, I've been telling my students for 4 years that the courts have declared over and over multiple times that there was not widespread voter fraud in 2020.
I
Communist,
mean,
man.
if that doesn't seal the deal of why you need to get your kids out of government school, I'm not sure what will. And even along those lines, another broader issue with like this charter school problem, with separation of church and state, because when is the government going to recognize that these commies are oftentimes more religious than the strictest adherent to any religion? It doesn't have to be Christianity, but think of like a jihadi extremist Muslim. We call them extremists. They're not. They're actually adhering to the belief system at its core, where most are fair weather, just like most Catholics. Well, you name the religion. Most people who follow a religion, they're not the most studious in doing so. Maybe they go to church or mosque or whatever on Sunday or whatever their holy day is, but most aren't even doing that. But these commies dyed in the wool. It is their religion. So they'll talk about separation in church and state for you or me because we have a biblical worldview, but not for themselves because they're godless heathens. But being following the tenets of a false religion is still a religion, and that's what it is to them. They chop off their own genitals, but they want to control what you do with your kids. How is that not a religion? That's the modern day Molech, taking your children up there and offer them to this false god. And then also with the school issue, there's been a broader change across the nation in recent years of school choice and even homeschooling. We were listening to this podcast last night about this, where some states are approving for homeschool parents even to get certain amount of money or government funding essentially to handle curriculum or other pieces of it. But that is also another tenant or another piece of the dyed in the wool commies trying to seize control of your children. Because what happens when you, as the homeschool parent, who you stand on principle, or the Christian school who you say you stand on principle, you say you stand on a firm foundation, but when the government says, well, if you do school choice, we'll give you money. We've seen it firsthand here. We had family who went to a private Christian school a couple years back. That school started doing school choice, and it changed the entire makeup of the school to the point where they've got LGBTQ type kids roaming around the hallways, flamboyantly so. And it's like, well, this is not a Christian school. And I'm not saying as a Christian, you don't accept that person and you don't try to help them realize the error of their way. But how do you balance that when you say, well, we're a Christian school founded on Christian beliefs, founded on Christian values and principles and God's law, and then the government says, well, you got to accept whoever we send to you, otherwise we're not going to give you that money.
I got one more. outside of the education context, but definitely in line with the choke point context, because the Department of Education is clearly a choke point. The teachers' unions got their roots in there. They get their funding in there, their power in there. They have the force of the Department of Justice, essentially. They can say civil rights violation because you're saying that it's improper for a kid to identify as a cat when they're walking around the school, right? And even at the state level, you got Ryan Walters there, but at the same time, you see the teachers at a local level. There are petty despots at all points. And I want to highlight this one where a gentleman in Virginia tried to be an active citizen and say, hey, look, the street's really dangerous here. People are speeding. We need to have a crosswalk. Someone's going to get hurt. Someone's going to die. It fell on deaf ears. So he took action, and then government decided to government harder. Here's a news report.
One Charlottesville man is facing jail time after using what he says was chalk to create his own makeshift crosswalk in the city. While this activist feels he's just trying to make the roads safer, the city says it's vandalism. Maggie Glass shares what the area looks like now.
At the intersection of Elliott Avenue and 2nd Street Southeast, it looks like there's some sort of makeshift crosswalk here. The reality is these lines just represent a battle between the city of Charlottesville and one man. Kevin Cox is well known around Charlottesville for his outspoken pedestrian advocacy. This strip of Elliott Avenue is one of the places he has a gripe with.
They drive too fast and they ignore pedestrians.
After pleading with the city for a crosswalk here to no avail, Cox decided to take measures into his own hands.
I walked across the street with a line marker with a can of spray chalk, not paint, it was spray chalk.
That caught the attention of City Hall and the police department. First, they painted over Cox's lines, then arrested him. Cox is facing misdemeanor charges for the intentional destruction of property.
Dude, how many times have your girls taken chalk outside and drawn on the street? But they had to use government resources because they said, oh, we had to paint over it. We couldn't just run a hose.
And this again is just another example.
Rain.
Yes, the rain's not going to wash the chalk away. Come on. I don't know the Charlottesville's municipal code, but by and large, vandalism ordinances are for something that's permanent, like paint, not chalk. So this again is an example of government not being a servant for your good, but being a tyrant for your ill, because this guy pleaded with the government, just make a crosswalk here. How long is that going to take a couple of the guys who work at DPW for the city? It's going to take them 2 hours to block off traffic, spray, or make a crosswalk, and then they don't do it to no avail, like she said. So he's like, all right, I'm just going to engage in some civil disobedience, which, let's not forget, is a critically important piece of doing America, as you like to say, Steve. And so he puts a couple lines of chalk there to protest. Is that really vandalism? I bet you by statute it is not, or by ordinance it's not.
All right. That's going to sum it up for today on the American Radicals podcast. But as always, we're going to get Garrett's perspective, and I have a fun palate cleanse for people that are going into summer break, a way to keep your kids entertained a little bit. But take it away, Garrett.
Yes, sir. For those of us who have followed along the last handful of episodes, we're in kind of a quasi mix between Exodus and 1 John, where we're talking about the 9th commandment, you shall not bear false witness against your enemy, but also in 1 John 18 through 27. I'll just read the first few verses here as it ties into the clip I'm going to play. Children, it is the last hour, and as you have heard that Antichrist is coming, so now many Antichrists have come. Therefore, we know that it is the last hour. They went out from us, but they were not of us. For if they had been of us, they would have continued with us. But they went out, that it might become plain that they all are not of us. But you have been anointed by the Holy One, and you all have knowledge. I write to you not because you do not know the truth, but because you know it, and because no lie is of the truth. Who is the liar but he who denies that Jesus is the Christ? This is the Antichrist, he who denies the Father and the Son. No one who denies the Son has the Father. Whoever confesses the Son has the Father also.
There were people in the early church that were already denying the truth that Jesus is the Christ. Now, why is that truth so important? Well, Christianity, founded on the premise that Jesus is the Christ, was revolutionary in many ways. But one of the ways that it was revolutionary is that it allowed us to understand who defines what is right and who defines what is wrong, who defines what is true and who defines what is false. That if Jesus is the Christ, then Jesus is divine. If Jesus is divine, then he is absolute. If Jesus is absolute, then he is the author alone of truth. And he alone defines what is false. He alone defines what is right, and he alone defines what is wrong. You take Jesus out of the equation, or Jesus is a mere mortal, or just a man, or just the leader of an organized religion, then there is no basis on which we can claim that there is such thing called truth. And John is imploring the church through the power of the Holy Spirit to not reject the truth, because it is through the truth that we are set free. It is through the truth that we both love God and we love our neighbor. Without this truth, we will never get what we ultimately need. Without truth, we have no objective morality, no objective justice, no objective love, and no objective forgiveness. And it's the reason why millions of Christians over the last 2,000 years have given their lives over, because they understand that the truth that we hold to and cling to is the truth alone that has the power to set us free. So the ninth commandment presupposes, in its call and its exhortation for us to not bear false witness, it presupposes the reality of truth. Secondly, it not only presupposes that there is such thing called truth, but secondly, it presupposes the suppression of truth. It presupposes that because of our sin nature, we are natural-born liars and suppressors of that truth. In verse 22 of 1 John 2, it says, "Who is the liar but he who denies the truth that Jesus is the Christ?" It seems severe that John would use the word liar. Why not say ignorant to the truth? Well, there's a reason for that. John understood that deep down inside of every single human being is the reality of God. Paul writes of this in Romans chapter 1, that we suppress the truth of God in what? In our unrighteousness, in our sin nature. It's why R.C. Sproul would often say there is no such thing as an atheist, just people who choose to live as if he doesn't exist.
And really, isn't that what this all comes down to? Why Steve and I are even sitting here doing a podcast? When you stand for truth, when you proclaim truth, when you point out false witness, when you point out injustice, when you constantly say, that's not true, that's not what happened, that's false, they're lying to you. Give me 6 to 8 months, bro. Trust me, bro. Don't worry, bro. I'm still the same guy I was, bro. And you don't see much actual change, and then you begin to question what is true. Are they really telling me the truth? Who is the truth? What is the truth? Well, the pinnacle, the foundation is Jesus Christ. And so for us, it's minor. He mentioned, the pastor mentioned there, that millions of Christians have given their life for the truth of Christ over the last handful of thousands of years. So it's minor for Steve and I and Kyle and others to sit here day after day and try to proclaim the truth and try to point out the truth and continue to not have the wrongs, the false witness against us righted. But should we even really bother questioning that anymore? Because people who are not of the truth are going to live a lie. They're going to proclaim lies, and they're going to continue to lie. I don't know. That is just a big piece for me that continues to stand out, especially in regards to the ninth commandment and our own turmoil that has led us to this new path.
And for today's palate cleanse, my kids are out for summer vacation. I'm trying to keep them occupied. I'm trying to keep them thinking that I am way smarter than them, even though they go to a good school. I just, got to keep that edge up here. Here's a fun magic trick that you can do on your kids and let them think that you can read their minds, which could also have some great ramifications for when they get a little bit older and they think they can pull one past you.
Okay, baby, I'm gonna show you a magic trick. Can you think of an animal?
Since when do you do magic tricks?
I saw it online.
Okay.
Think of an animal?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna lock in my answer.
Okay.
What was your animal?
Rhinoceros.
Rhinoceros. Okay. Here you go. You can have that.
Okay.
Okay.
Since when do you... Okay.
And now I want you to think of a color.
A color?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Did you think of it?
Yes.
Okay.
What are you doing?
I'm locking it in.
Okay.
Here you go. What was the color?
Blue.
Okay. And then now I want you to think of a direction, like up, down, left, right.
Okay.
Okay. Final answer?
Yeah, down.
Okay. Down?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna give this to you. I locked in my answers, okay?
Okay.
Now, can you give me back my answers?
Okay.
So, what did you say your direction was?
Down.
Down?
Okay. So where did you learn this? Did you learn it from Sean?
And what did you say your answer for what animal it was?
Rhinoceros. Rhino. How are
I
you
know how to
doing
spell
that?
rhinoceros. Okay.
How are you doing that?
And what was the color?
Blue. Shut up.
What does this say?
What? That's blue? How'd you do that? Since when?
I read your mind. It's a magic trick.
Since
Boom.
when did you know?
Give it a try.
I'm doing
I got
that on my
both of mine.
kids in like 5 minutes. I'm going to do that to them.
All right. I won't hold you to it then. I want to find out how they do it because mine both fell for it. It was good times. I'm going to try to redo it today. All right, guys. That is going to do it for us today on the American Radicals podcast here, rumble.com/amradpod. Back with you Saturday, 10:30. Until then, guys, have a great day.
You've been listening to the voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/amradpod.